So, when you think of the Great Lakes, what comes to mind? Probably summer vacation, right? A huge, beautiful expanse of fresh water. A familiar, almost tame image. But that whole perception? It's dangerously wrong. We're not just talking about lakes here. These are treacherous inland seas, and we're about to dive into exactly why. This right here, this quote, it just hits the nail on the head. This is the central and often fatal misconception. Thinking of Lake Superior or Lake Michigan as just a supersized version of your local swimming hole is the first and biggest mistake you can make. The reality is, they act like freshwater oceans. And if you want proof, well, the proof is in the wreckage. The Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum estimates that over 6,000 ships have been lost on these waters. 6,000. I mean, that's not a number you associate with a lake, is it? And the human costs, it's even more staggering. We're talking an estimated 30,000 lives lost. Every single one of them, a story about a day that went horribly, terribly wrong, on waters people thought they understood. To really get a handle on the danger, you have to first get a handle on the sheer scale. So picture this. You're in a boat, right? In the middle of any of the Great Lakes. You look around, 360 degrees. You can't see the shore in any direction. It's just water, all the way to the horizon. Now check this out, because this slide really puts that scale into a shocking context. Lake Superior, the biggest of the bunch, is 350 miles long. That is a greater distance than crossing the entire North Sea from Scotland to Norway. Let that sink in for a second. An inland lake in North America is wider than a notorious stormy sea. And it gets even crazier when you combine them. The total surface area of all 5 lakes is actually a little bit larger than the entire United Kingdom. We are talking about a freshwater system so massive, it's bigger than a major European country. Okay, so we've established the scale. It's immense. Now let's look at how that massive scale creates this unique and deadly cocktail of dangers. We can really break it down into 3 things: the water itself, the weather, and the waves. It all starts with a simple fact of physics that most of us just never think about. See, freshwater is less dense than saltwater, and what that means is it's less buoyant. You just don't float as well. For a swimmer who is in trouble, or even a massive steel ship that's taking on water, that lack of buoyancy means you sink faster, period. Then you have these bizarre phenomena that honestly sound like something out of a sci-fi movie. It's called a seiche. And essentially, the entire lake sloshes back and forth like water in a giant bathtub. Strong winds can literally push the water to one side of the lake, causing water levels to surge by several feet. But on the other side, the water level can drop so fast that shipwreck survivors have actually reported seeing the lake bottom completely exposed in the middle of a storm. And oh yeah, the water is brutally, brutally cold. Even at the height of summer, the temperature in Lake Superior can be just a few degrees above freezing. If you fall in, you're not fighting some long, drawn-out battle. You are fighting for your life in seconds. There's something called the 1-10-1 rule, and it's critical. You have 1 minute to get over that initial cold shock and control your breathing. You have 10 minutes of meaningful muscle movement, and you have about 1 hour before you lose consciousness. The clock is ticking the second you hit that water. So the water is dangerous all by itself. But when you combine it with the region's weather, that's when the lake becomes a true monster. This is especially true in the late fall, when the infamous gales of November whip up some of the most violent conditions you can possibly imagine on water. You see, storms on the Great Lakes are a whole different beast than ocean storms. They can pop up with terrifying speed. And because the lakes are enclosed, the waves have a much shorter distance between them. So instead of rising and falling on these long, rolling ocean swells, a ship just gets battered relentlessly. One wave slams into you, and before you can recover, the next one hits. Then you add waves bouncing off the shorelines, and suddenly you have this completely chaotic sea coming at you from every direction at once. And out of that chaos, you can get these specific, incredibly deadly patterns. One of the most feared is called the Three Sisters. It's a series of 3 huge rogue waves. The first one crashes over the deck, but before that water has a chance to run off, the second wave hits, adding its weight, and then the third one strikes. And that combined tonnage of water is enough to push a massive ship straight to the bottom in seconds. And that Three Sisters phenomenon, well, it's one of the leading theories for what sank the most famous shipwreck on all of the Great Lakes, the loss of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald back in November 1975. It's the ultimate case study of the raw power of these inland seas. The parallels to another, more famous disaster are just striking. A lot like the Titanic, the Fitzgerald was a record breaker, the biggest, fastest freighter on the lakes. She was a workhorse, considered practically unsinkable. And just like the Titanic, she broke in half as she went down, sinking in minutes, and taking her entire crew of 29 sailors with her. That tragedy was immortalized in a famous song by Gordon Lightfoot, and this one line has haunted people for decades. It's incredibly poetic, but it also just happens to be scientifically true. And the science behind that lyric is just chilling. The water at the bottom of Lake Superior, where the Fitzgerald rests, is only a few degrees above freezing. At that temperature, the bacteria that cause decomposition in a human body, they just can't function. And without the gases they produce, a body never becomes buoyant enough to float to the surface. The lake, quite literally, never gives up her dead. The forces that can sink a 730-foot freighter are obviously immense. But here's the thing. You don't need a November gale to be in mortal danger. For most people, the greatest threat isn't in some epic winter storm. It's on a beautiful, sunny day at the beach, and it's driven by a complete misunderstanding of the water. Let me just ask you a question. You're at the beach, you're wading out, and the water's only up to your waist. You can see the shore, you feel totally safe. How could you possibly be in any real danger? Well, the danger is invisible. A lot of Great Lakes beaches have such a gentle slope that you can walk hundreds of yards out from shore and still be standing. And that creates this powerful, false sense of security. But the sandbars under your feet are always shifting, hiding sudden, deep drop-offs. And even worse, powerful rip currents can form in that shallow water, and they can pull you off your feet and drag you out before you even know what's happening. This quote from a near-drowning survivor is it's terrifying. He was a bad swimmer, got caught in a rip current, and he describes being so far from shore, trying to swim back and just not moving. The exhaustion, the panic, that feeling of realizing you're helpless in water that seemed totally safe just a few minutes ago. It's a horribly common story. He was lucky. He was saved. So many others are not. And this really brings us to the single most important point of this whole thing. The monster waves, the November gales, the freezing water, yeah, they're all massive threats. But the single greatest danger, the one thing that connects the sinking of a giant freighter to the drowning of a swimmer on a sunny day, is underestimation. So I'll just leave you with this question to think about. When a body of water is big enough to create its own weather systems, big enough to generate waves that can swallow a ship longer than 2 football fields, big enough to hide thousands of wrecks in its depths, at what point does the word lake just stop making any sense at all?